Welcome to footballgameplan.com, where football makes sense. That's Emery Hunt, the czar of the playbook, and I'm Tyler Merkovich, and we're bringing you an FCS preview on the Patriot League. Emery, the Patriot League, Holy Cross Crusaders, led by Tom Gilmore, 7-4 last year, 14 returning starters, and Dominic Randolph, sick numbers, 34-17 touchdown-interception ratio, behind the sick offensive line that returns 45 starts between 6 of them.
Yeah, one thing that's also impressive about Dominic Randolph, 65% of his passes get completed. To say that he throw the ball a lot, that's impressive. He's a real good player, one of the best players in the conference and the entire FCS. Also, with that offensive line, 2 all-conference players come back. You have Aaron Jones and Chris Poole. Those 2 guys are going to anchor that offensive line. There's a lot of depth, a lot of starting experience to go along with those 2 star players. My question is, they have to replace the running backs and they have to replace the receivers. One guy that's returning, their receiver, Bill Edgar, 4 touchdowns, is their leading, candidate coming back. But they need some more players around him, and they also need to find a bell cow running back.
Defensive side of the ball, they improved run defense, not so much with the pass defense. Second-team linebacker Sean Lampkin and Marcus Rodriguez are the core at the linebackers. Cornerback Michael Wright, second-team All-Patriot League, needs to help step up that secondary.
Well, I'm going to go with the contrary. I think they do have a solid secondary. You look at Michael Wright and Anthony DeMichael. Both these guys combined 22 pass breakups and 3 interceptions. So they get their hands on a lot of balls. They may not catch a lot of picks. Also, working my way down, the linebackers are solid too. Marcus Rodriguez, 68 tackles, 4 sacks. So my question would be, the defensive line, can they generate a pass rush? The run defense was good last year. You have 3.7 yards per carry that was given up. But can they get to the quarterback? That's going to help out that secondary even more. But I think the back half is really good defense.
You don't want to leave that secondary hanging out to dry. They can't cover for that long.
Exactly.
So the pass rush has to do with the secondary. It all is cohesive. In football, Lafayette Leopards coming out of Pennsylvania.
Well, I was getting ready to say one thing about their defense before we wrapped it up. That Holy Cross defense is one thing that you want to watch out for. They're one of the best in the FCS.
The Lafayette Leopards, Frank Tavani, 7-4 last year, 11 returning starters. They lose their top 3 receivers. Quarterback Rob Curley is the guy back. And second-team all-pick left tackle Ryan Hart-Predmore anchors the offensive line, and a boatload of 3 running backs.
Well, they have a pretty good offensive line, so that's one strength they have. So you can put a check mark by the offensive line. Quarterback Rob Curley, 9 touchdowns, 4 interceptions. Look for his production to improve, year 2, this season. The top 2 rushers are Maurice White and Tyrell Kuhn. Those 2 guys are real phenomenal backs, so they're going to lean on those guys a little bit more with that offensive line because their wide receivers are very inexperienced. So until they get some playmakers out there on the flanks, they're going to have to rely on that running game.
Don't forget about DeAndre Morrow, also.
Good player.
Staple of backs bracket. Mark Legario, the linebacker, second-team All-Selection, 93 tackles, 10.5 tackles for a loss, and 2 sacks. Great all-around numbers. Eric McGovern, the free safety, and cornerback Carlos Lowe.
Those are 2 good defensive backs they have, and they're real good playmakers in that secondary. That defense overall, 17 points a game, 3 yards a carry. Opposing quarterbacks only completed 52% of their passes. So they play real good defense in Bethlehem, PA. They're really good out there at Lafayette. You look at Mark Legario, 93 tackles, 10.5 TFLs. Awesome playmaker. Might be the best playmaker in the entire conference. I like the defense at Lafayette.
Dick Biddle, 9-3 last year, leading Colgate with 12 returning starters. Greg Sullivan was the second-team all-conference selection, but they lose All-American running back Jordan Scott, and they're going to replace him with Nate Ekus, who's a preseason pick to be a pretty solid running back. He had 10 touchdowns last year, over 5 yards per carry.
Well, biggest question I have with Colgate, they lose all 4 starters off that offensive line. That's going to be hard for them to replace. That's a lot of leadership that's going to be gone this season. But I also like their receiver, Pat Simmons, 1,100 yards receiving, 9 touchdowns. You look at the total offense, they average 400 yards a game, 5.1 yards a carry. That's pretty good. They had a real good offense last year, so they returned, Nate Ekus, 10 touchdowns. You get in the end zone 10 times. That's impressive. 5.6 yards a carry, 900 yards. I like that offense as a whole.
Nick Hennessy was an All-American right tackle. The parts but they bring in Cincinnati transfer Blake McCroskey, hopefully make up for the losses on the offensive line. Defensive side of the ball, second team all-conference pick nose tackle Paul Mancuso, linebacker Greg Hadley, also second team, and Wayne Moulton, cornerback, led the team with 3 interceptions.
Well, that defensive line is going to struggle this year, I think. You also look at they gave up 29 points a game, 5.5 yards per rush. You can't win like that, and especially in the the Patriot League where there's a lot of good running backs and a lot of good offenses. You look at the secondary, it's very experienced. Opposing quarterbacks only completed 55% of their passes. That's impressive. You look at Wayne Moulton is a very, very good player. He could be in the running for the Defensive Player of the Year award in the Patriot League. He's a real good player. Linebackers, you mentioned Greg Hadley, 80 tackles. Mike Carbone, 62 tackles. Combined 144 tackles. A lot of production out there, linebacking core. The defensive line is the biggest question mark on that team. And unless they get that situation straightened out, they might struggle this year.
Tom Masella leads the Fordham Rams out of the BX. 5-6 last year, 15 returning starters. And this team went from 29 points per game in 2007 to only 21.5 last year. John Skelton, the all-time leading pass leader, is in tow to play quarterback. Xavier Martin, second team all-conference selection, but they lose 4 key offensive linemen.
Well, that's the key. The offensive line will be a weakness this season for these guys, so you look for that points per game number to probably drop a little bit. Xavier Martin, 1,200 yards rushing, 4.5 yards a carry, real good running back out there in the Bronx. You look at the dependable wide receivers. Asa Lucas is the top of the group. Also keep an eye on Jason Caldwell, another good receiver. They've always had good receivers at Fordham.
All conference players lead the defensive unit. The tackle Greg DeMarco graduated, but James Crockett, linebacker, is back. 67 tackles, 5.5 tackles for loss.
That's the strength of that defense, the linebackers. The defensive line needs a lot of work. They have some rebuilding to do. Lost a lot of key players, a lot of production off the defensive line is going. Also, their pass defense is also pretty good. They can get back there, get their hands on a lot of balls and interceptions and pass breakups, but they have to get something done with that defensive line. Otherwise, they're going to struggle again on their defense this year.
Let's go back to PA. The Mountain Hawks of Lehigh. Fourth-year coach Andy Cohen, 5-6 last year. 9 starters returning. J.B. Clark, 23 touchdowns, 10 interceptions. They lose all their top receivers. At least they have left tackle Will Rackley, who was a first-team all-selection back. Of course, they lose Matt McGowan, too, and Jay Campbell and Jaron Walker back from injury. Try to help out Campbell in that running back position.
Well, they have to find a running back because they lost all the top runners. They have to get some production out the running game. They lose, 3 starters on the offensive line, so hopefully the left tackle is going to help them out a lot because he's a solid returning starter. And they lose all the top wide receivers. So, it's going to be tough for J.B. Clark to repeat his success, but he's an awesome player. I like J.B. Clark.
Defensive side of the ball, nose guard B.J. Benning was a first-team all-selection, but they lose Brian Jackson, defensive end, and Tim Diamond, their linebacker, and they gave up 247 yards per game, but Matt Cohen, he's going to lead the defense. 6.5 sack, 10.5 tackle for loss, and 3 interceptions. Great all-around numbers for the linebacker, Matt Cohen.
Yeah, Matt Cohen is a real good player. That's a really good job by a linebacker to get his hands on 3 interceptions. That's impressive. That means he's athletic and he can play the ball, which is tough for a lot of linebackers to do. If you like cornerbacks, one cornerback you want to keep your eye on, Gerard Cribbs. 3 interceptions, 10 pass breakups, and 1 punt return for a touchdown. This guy reminds me a lot of Aaron Glenn that played back for Texas A&M. A shorter guy, active, able to jump those slants and pick those balls off. He's a real good player. I like him. In the secondary, they also have John Kennedy, 3 interceptions as well. My question on defense, the defensive line might have a setback this season because they lost a lot of key players. Again, this whole conference has been losing a lot of key players on the defensive line, but this is another team where the defensive line has to step up and make plays.